Okay, so hi everyone. A little bit delayed, but nevertheless, it's an important discussion for your class and for me. Um, um, the format here is that for public relations visual communications, I will invite a series of professors, specialists in the field of communication and visual communication in special, um, to speak to you to their craft, but also to try to answer your questions. And I shared with Professor Samoilenko the list of your questions. But as I said before, I will go through a kind of format because we are recording this. And there's 10 of you in the class, and whoever wasn't able to come online directly on Zoom will at least be able to see this by tonight. And then they will have to, think about their questions, the answers, and participate in the thread of discussions. So without further ado, let me thank Dr. Samoilenko and introduce him briefly, because I shared with you his resume, as they call it in the United States, or CV, as they call it in Europe, and we are both from Europe. So Dr. Sergei Samoilenko, he goes by Serge, right?
Yeah.
Teaches in the Department of Communication at George Mason University. His research focuses on issues in crisis communication, public relations, and reputation management. Samoilenko is a founding member of CARP, the Research Lab for Character Assassination and Reputation Politics, based at George Mason University in Virginia. And this is in brief. Again, without wasting too much time, because I said that maybe this should be in the format of around an hour, we can go through the questions for the next 50 minutes. And maybe for the last 10, 15 minutes, we can have some extra questions if need be from the students. So my questions to Dr. Samoilenko were like that. What visuals are important in the world today to your perception?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me, because I think it's a really important conversation. And as we know, visuals are, in this day and age, more important than words. They are very convincing. People believe visuals at once. And as we know that young people especially are more drawn to visuals as opposed to written text. Therefore, we cannot stress enough how it's important to be able to understand them and to tell the difference between, good visual and maybe some manufactured or doctored visuals. So, and that's what we do, professionals in communication. We try to study, which visuals basically authentic and which ones are forged or doctored by some strategic actors. Because as we know that it requires some skill. Not everybody is able to tell the difference. But obviously, with the development of online technology, so any visual that people can record in a particular context and then put on the internet, like on YouTube video, are really important, because they kind of document things happening right now. And what's so special about them, that these visuals can be transmitted in real time. And as a result, we all can actually see what's happening in any part of the world. Like, for example, with a lot of things happening right now, people all over the world can just join live stream. They can take a look at pictures, they can take a look at videos, and they can make judgment and assess the situation in real time. And I think it's pretty unique for the time being, because if you think about like 10, 20 years ago, none of this was possible. So you guys live in a really unique time.
Yes, yes. I was wondering, as in connection with this, I remember that, I had, it had a huge impact on me when I came the first time in the United States in 2003. And I was accustomed in Romania, but also when I traveled to other countries because I worked for the Ministry of Culture, Ministry of Education of Romania. I've been to India, I've been to France, to Austria, so on and so forth. And every time you could see CNN International in another format, in a European format. 1 hour news concentrated at the maximum impact at 8 o'clock evening, and then at the end, kind of in between the news and the sports news, you had 1 minute or something like that of no comment images. You know, traveling image from something that was on a hot spot in the world at that time. There were indeed discussions about this, that even the camera can crop the reality. They were showing, for example, a scene somewhere in Israel where the army was battling like forever. You know, some people who had to be moved from their own land. And they were showing how those people were throwing rocks at the police and military police and the army. And those people were shooting rubber bullets,
Mm-hmm.
a reality that we see now in the United States towards those people who are protecting their lands. So
Right.
with no comment, you would say, oh, those people are resisting authority.
Mm-hmm.
So even with what you see, it can cheat on you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's important to understand the visual framing, as we call it, because we really have to understand the context. Without context, you can look at the picture and you can misinterpret it. So therefore, understanding the context, the culture, what's happening around is really important, because I mean, how else can you tell the difference whether it's a scene of let's say violence, or it's a scene of something else, right? So therefore, we really need to be very accurate, and really need to be kind of perceptive of a lot of things. I mentioned visual framing. So the whole idea of framing goes back to 1922, when Walter Lippmann wrote his book about public opinion. And he was talking about pictures in our heads. And so he was basically referring to stereotypes, and how stereotypes can actually guide our behavior. But he was also referring to painting the window on the wall. As journalists and any communication professionals have this power to paint a window on the wall, and then the audience would look at that window without realizing it's a painted, so it's not a real window. So professional communicators, journalists, public relations people, we have this power to paint those pictures on the wall and make the audience believe it's a real one. So therefore, the issue of ethics is really important. I mean, can we afford to paint something and to distract the audience attention or not? So that's why I think any conversation about videos and visual framing need to be discussed in connection to ethics. So it's an important part.
And actually, that window on the wall idea is taken from thousands of years ago from Plato,
Yeah,
the myth of the cave.
right.
No, it's kind of a second-hand perception of reality, but we can discuss about that. You know, look it up, the myth of the cave
Yeah,
from Plato. That's very interesting.
it is very,
Sorry.
yeah, it is very interesting. And that kind of, I'm also thinking about hyper reality, but it's already kind of, when we discussed the 90s, you know, how Baudrillard talked about the Iraq war. And basically he said the only way we experience the war these days by looking at television, because if you're not there and if you are not really, how can you know what indeed is happening, right? So you basically form your opinion looking at that, again, picture in the television. And then your televised reality and actual reality, they blended together, and you get this hyper reality, and this hyper reality you hold as true. But again, you know, how can you tell?
And actually, with social media and with the technology today, If you have the tools in hand and the know-how, anybody can become a citizen journalist, but you
Right.
don't know their intentions behind their right of expressing their opinion. You know,
Yeah, that's a problem.
they might not be just genuine observers of reality,
Mhm.
whatever the reality is. Okay, so I think we covered a little bit how can those visuals and the text that accompany them be understood, interpreted, evaluated, right?
Yes.
Uh, so then I'll go to my last question, and then how do you want to do it with the student questions? Do you have the list next to you? Should I read it for you?
I think you can, I have a questions in front of me, but maybe we'll let students ask questions they want to ask, or you can choose the ones that you think are good. But yeah, we can go by the list.
I'm
It's
sure,
up to you.
I'm sure that especially those who are not present at the Zoom meeting will feel like, oh, you didn't ask my question. But well, anyhow, there will be too many questions to be able to answer in 50 minutes. So maybe through the answers, we will cover some of the issues that they were concerned of. How do visuals contribute to making or breaking a public figure, branding and or character assassination?
Okay, it's such a great question, and I wish I had more time because actually you can talk about this for a week. So when we talk about all those things, branding or character assassination, we really have to understand that, um, especially in political context, and both ideas of branding or political branding and character assassination, they originate from political psychology, how we, in a way, package a person's image in a sense, and we try to sell it to a particular audience. So in a way, we go about political marketing the same way we go about like business marketing. So the whole idea of branding and packaging and promoting a person or candidate pretty much is not far from promoting a product, right? So, and then the idea of character assassination is challenging that image and challenging the moral positioning or moral presentation of that person and his her personality in the public sphere is also really important, because in any politicized context, you see that people try to engage in what we call self-representation or promotion. And also you have challengers that trying to question or challenge their perceived public image and what we call ethos, right, or credibility. In other words, do you have enough qualifications, or do you have enough credibility to be there and serve as an important public figure, right? So, and that's really important in liberal democracies, because in liberal democracies context, the whole idea of challenging public figure is the essence of democracy. So you basically have political debates when two people kind of debate and engage in three functions. So the Will Benoit, who is a very famous communication scholar, said that during political debates, actors engage in three things. So they praise themselves, they attack others, and they defend their characters, right? So in other words, they kind of do things, so they talk about what they can do for this country or for this particular city or a county, and then they also try to question the credibility of another person, and they try to kind of defend their character. So in other words, I mean, those things are really important, because you're being judged on your skills of how well you can present yourself and how well you can pretty much defend yourself under stress, right? So at this point, those are really important skills. And this might not apply in any context. Like, for example, in authoritarian context, that might not be a matter because they might not have political debates, right? Like, for example, in, let's say, think about Russia, right? So, I mean, there are some debates, but, you know, the president decides not to participate in debates, he won't, right? And so in more monarchic societies, kings and monarchs, they don't have to, right? Because the power is given to them. So at this point, this is a really kind of Western and democratic feature. So that's why when we talk about the idea of character assassination, we have to talk about the specific political settings, right? So now, when we discuss those things in terms of like visuals, we know that, especially right now, any public figure, any politician has higher risk of being challenged simply because of being at the wrong time, at the wrong place, and doing the wrong thing. Think about 2 years ago when Ted Cruz's Twitter account, by accident, according to them, liked some pornographic tweet, right? And later they said it was an intern in the office who did that. But then everybody started making fun of Ted Cruz and his office and his candidacy and everything. So we don't know whether it was a real person who did that or it was indeed intern, or maybe it just happened by mistake by social bot, right? But we started talking about, you know, Ted Cruz and his personality and his character and whether he did it or not. So it created a story, right? So think about multiple of examples. Anthony Weiner, you know, the guy did it 3 times. You know, why he did it, we don't know. We don't question his psychological profile. But I mean, he was a promising politician and he basically ruined his own career. And as a result, because his wife, Abedin, used the laptop from which, you know, she was saying emails to Hillary Clinton. You know, the whole story about emails and laptops started circulating during the 2016 presidential election campaign, right? All of a sudden, this email issue became important, right? So Trump's campaigners were emphasizing this story and they're saying, how can you trust a person who would use her personal email account to communicate important, national matters? So lots of things. So the idea behind is that pretty much with character assassination, your public standing or your reputation become questions when you have something to lose. And those people who have a lot of symbolic capital, as we call it, have kind of a lot of, they have a lot of risks out there, reputational risks. Because if you don't have a character, you know, nobody wants to destroy it. But if you are like on a certain pedestal, all of a sudden you have challengers who want to question you whether you should be there. And they could be anyone. They could be competitors. They could be any observers. They could be passersby. But all of a sudden, you become that, you know, vulnerable person that's surrounded by multiple risks. And that's a question. That's a problem with that. So and because of that, so when you do something in a public space and it's recorded automatically, you can be relegated to lower status simply because, I mean, people questioned you and questioned what you said in television, for example, or what you did on the internet. So that's why you guys really have to be careful, because you grow up in this digital age where you leave a lot of digital footprints. So whatever you did now, and whether you decide to go into politics 20 years from now, will be at some point matter of discussion, because Google doesn't delete anything. So if in 20 years now you decide to do something, remember, so some of your old chats might be discovered, and your personality might be questions about what you did at that, you know, home party, you know, 25 years ago, and so on and so forth. Think about those politicians. Well, think about the whole Kavanaugh case, right? When they were questioning his behavior at the school party, right? And at that time, they didn't have computers, they didn't have the internet. So think about now. So you're surrounded by more risks than you imagine.
Yeah, it's interesting that actually for a politician, these levels of branding can start from a person, but a person has to have certain weight because of their function, because of their skills, because of their position in society, because their political position or position in the world. Think of the Pope or a president of a state. Um, the, there's a difference between taking care of your persona online as an individual, whoever you are, as compared to those people. Also, celebrities, sports figures that are well known. That's why these people take care of their business in a more careful way, but they are backed up by marketing people, lawyers, and so on and so forth, all kinds of advisors. So you need real funding for being advised to do the right thing, even if you made a huge mistake. Think about many sports figures who trespassed one way or another against their spouses.
Oh yeah.
They had an accident. There were actresses who had an accident and they struck somebody in the street. And with the right lawyers, with the right image builders, they went out of this scot-free.
Oh yeah.
But also there's the branding issue is multifaceted in the case of countries, in the case of institutions, in the case of think about European Union, which is multiple countries within one. They have to make common efforts for the perception of the world towards them to be one of success. And the stories of the past 5 6 years of increased immigration and problems starting from Greece with that wave of migrants from Middle East that were collecting together with them people from deeper Asia or Northern Africa, but mainly from a war zone. They had to struggle for a long time with the perception of, just a moment, now you are saying to people escaping a war zone that they can't be refugees, when you accepted all those populations that were refugees from a torn, war-torn Europe after the Second World War. So these declarations that are international and accepted practices went to nothing in the situation of a wave of migrants that had a lot of needs. And nobody wanted, in Austria, in Germany, in northern countries of Europe to accept all of a sudden, and they didn't know what to do with them, where to place them. Only Germany, in a German style, organized them, first putting them in decrepit buildings that they were refurbishing, or in stadiums for a while, and then they placed them with, a little bit with a group with a certain population, talking with mayors to accept them, and knowing that they will be placed somewhere and taken care of, learning the language, learning some skills, checking their background, and then placing them in society in a way or another. So branding is not like, it comes in marketing from this idea of from cattle. Put a brand on the cattle, right? I'm the owner. um, but it's so much more diversified nowadays with the technology and with the implications of sound bites, or a passing image that was taken and then reinterpreted and commented, and then certain people will push towards a certain interpretation of the things. That's what we're witnessing now in the United States, with political parties and with whole movements, like MAGA, right? Um it came from a will of a certain part of the population to not be left aside. Minorities will push us out. Uh, you know, there's all kinds of issues there. But I'm not the one who should speak too much. So, so let's go back to the other questions. I see here, let's take at random some questions. It seems the role of practitioners is changing as they require more competency in visual communication to be successful in their communication roles. As a prospective public relations practitioner, how can one navigate the plethora of visual channels available, considering there is no real strategic orientation for the professional use of social media today?
Well, it's a great question, and I think it's there is no right answer to that because every case is specific. So I talk a lot to my colleagues from Public Relations Society of America, from National Capital Chapter, and they all deal with those issues differently. But I believe it's really important for you to understand the idea of kind of digital dashboard. So because you have to be digitally present and different social media accounts and different sites. Obviously, you can be everywhere, but you have to be able to multitask to somehow be able to kind of have all of your Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram accounts to be monitored and to be managed in a way that you appear professional. And obviously, you can also like wear different hats, different digital hats, because you have to know how to strategically present yourself in a sense that you perceived as someone who is, again, very professional. So for example, on Facebook, you can be one person, LinkedIn, you have to be another person. So every digital platform requires you to have certain skills, right? Certain abilities. And so one way you go about it is basically you observe and you monitor. So this is especially important when you deal with some times when any word can be misinterpreted. Like, for example, I see right now there are lots of discussions going on about protests, right? And people saying certain things might be, mistakenly misinterpreted, and you have a long kind of threads of conversations going on. And obviously, there could be any people watching. There could be your employees. There could be your friends. There could be your boss, right, with you on the same account. So, for example, for you guys, don't be surprised, but a lot of potential employers could be looking at your social media accounts. When they hire you, HR people have certain, software that allows them to look at other people's profiles. So we've known things like this happen. And if you did something, if you said something that you believe you should not be saying, and that's kind of LinkedIn account, let's say, well, you better not to have that tweet or that message over there, because again, people who don't know you might misinterpret it, might rather not to deal with you in the future. So you have to be really careful about that if you want the job, right? So you really have to be very strategic in a good sense, not in a manipulative sense, but in a sense that of having the right digital ethics and etiquette. So every platform has its own etiquette. So you really have to understand when to say, when not to say certain things. And, like, for example, I only have people I met in real life on my account, and I usually don't really add anyone who I don't know well, because I think it's really important for me just to be surrounded by positive people and somebody who can say something very constructive way. Like, for example, I don't really have much time to spend on like talking to people and debating about certain issues. And I think it's kind of healthy attitude that each of us have to kind of embrace, because while physically we can be everywhere, we can be participating in any social media network, and we shouldn't. But we really need to understand what's important. What's important for your job. Like, for example, we all know that LinkedIn we all have to use because of professional interactions. We also understand that being somewhere where people talk about something important is really topical. Like, for example, you go certain places where people discuss recent issues. Okay, so you have to be on Twitter to just follow recent trends. Okay, be there. You know, follow people, listen to conversations because you need to be informed, right? But again, be aware that it's a public space and it's a public forum, and you leave digital traces. So just be aware of those things. So as a professional, you really have to kind of make sure you centralize all of your communication and you master it. So not the digital world is mastering you. So just be professional.
And by the way, it starts nowadays earlier and earlier in life. This kind
Yes.
of notion of what you're going to show. Um, you know, I have two daughters who are now 11th and at the end of the 12th grade. And, you know, one of them is going to Washington, D.C. So they were told when we were going to visit universities that nowadays universities work with companies that allow them to look into social media, you know, Facebook, Twitter. It's rarer that people in high school really take care of their LinkedIn account. Uh, it's more relevant for you as students and especially as graduate students and so on and so forth. But they gave them examples of images that were interpreted and misinterpreted. For example, there were two girls, you know, during a break, just doing something cute, like describing a heart with the shape of their bodies, putting their hairs down on a beach, and so on and so forth. But through the image, in the background, you could see somebody drinking from a beer. So they were associated with, oh, you planned to show this into the heart. So you love drinking. So not a serious student for our university. So even such a small detail can mess up your life, you know?
Yeah, indeed. I think it's a good advice. Yeah.
Yes. I will go to the next question. I was reading the chapter titled Public Relations is Visual Meaning Making. I guess this is sending to something that our students had to read for the class. A concept that stood out to me that Collister and Robert Bauman brought up was that objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. First of all, what does this mean to you as an expert in character assassination? And can you give us an example to enhance our understanding? What are some suggestions to Americans as we view the onslaught of COVID-19 visual media on a daily basis, and so on and so forth?
Okay, so it's a great question, and I think it's really important to discuss the COVID-19 here because with COVID-19, you see a lot of conspiracies going on, and you see a lot of different actions are more important than facts and logic in many ways. So keep in mind that people are not always rational. And this is a blessing and a curse because if we all were rational all the time, they would actually probably figure out how we'll behave in the future, and we have an algorithm to control our behaviors. But we're also irrational in many ways because in a way, if we were rational all the time, we will just burn out very soon. So therefore, we want to hear things that we agree with, and we want to listen to the news that confirm our preconceived notions and our beliefs. And we want to see the world through the prism of a particular network that agrees with us. There are several concepts that come to my mind when I'm talking about this. Well, there is one that's a selective perception. You have to perceive things in a selective way. There is a selective exposure. You expose yourself to certain networks that agree with you. So if you're a Republican, you listen to Fox News. If you're a Democrat, to listen to MSNBC, right? If you are on Facebook, you want to unfriend all people who you don't agree with. And that creates kind of this echo chamber and digital bubble we all live in because we surround ourselves only with people who agree with us. And that's pretty dangerous in a sense that we lose this skill of debate and this skill of negotiation, because before social media, you met people simply by being out there and going places and growing on the streets, and you could see anyone who might agree or disagree with you, but you have to compromise. Nowadays, you don't have to, because you only spend time in places where everybody agrees with you, right? You don't go places that the people are being mean to you or saying things you don't agree with. And and as a result, we kind of losing that skill to be civil, because we don't have to anymore. You can just like expose yourself to only pleasant networks. All right. So during COVID-19, a lot of people were in a way trapped in those echo chambers, and they were listening to stories that were coming from their networks. And this is especially true with the scientific evidence that in your own networks, people pretty much pass a lot of misinformation simply because they believe it's true without actually looking at some alternative points of view. There's also some research showing that a lot of baby boomers have to be blamed for spreading a lot of misinformation, like conspiracy theories. So, and then they will send that things to their family members and friends and relatives and anyone, church members, everybody who they think will agree with them. And that's how a lot of these things circulate, right? So for example, during COVID-19, everybody believed like it's someone's plot, right? Some international governments are trying to take over the world order, and they're just giving us this virus so they could take over the entire nation, right? There were people like quick to believe that thing because because otherwise, how can you explain certain things, So if you can explain certain thing, if you're uncertain and if you're anxious, you try to reach out to the easiest explanation, right? And that's how we deal with what we call cognitive dissonance. Because if for some reason you are confronted with information that makes sense, but somehow kind of challenges everything that you believed before, well, you feel stupid, right? We don't want to feel stupid, right? Nobody likes that feeling. So therefore, we say, no, I would rather listen to that story. That story sounds more pleasant to me. So, and you believe in anything. And that's kind of shows how complicated we are, how complex we are as people and human beings. We're not rational by any means. We can be rational, but we can be also irrational. And therefore, we have to be especially careful, again, as communication professionals, to be able to tell good information from bad information. There are lots of ways how we can do that, starting with some basic fact checking, looking at authority, looking at where information is coming from, looking at whether it's been, how old that is. So, for example, during COVID-19, there were like circulating a lot of news that pretty much came up on the internet like 5 years ago, right? And people thought it was like a new information. So, so I think we really need to invest more in digital literacy in a sense, and start this at school, high school, maybe even before, just teaching young people how to, under some stressful circumstances, not to panic and to look at different facts and be able to tell fallacies from evidence. And I think by just starting understanding and just knowing that everyone is different and everybody has its own perception, and there are a lot of people who might not agree with you, you already kind of creating this healthy attitude towards things. So you won't be trapped in this fallacy, in this world that everybody is happy, everybody agrees with you. So because the world is much more complex than that.
But then could there be some kind of alliance, representatives of elected officials plus representatives of official media, that could make an alliance of fact checking and say, well, these things, if they go beyond a certain percentage of lies, these individuals should be, brought to the judgment of the public. It's
Yeah,
just the problem there. There is already those parties are entrenched.
well, there is a good question. And so speaking about the US, so right now, let's, if we specifically talk about the United States context, it's very complicated because a lot of communication, including hate speech, is basically, it's protected by the First Amendment. And a lot of things we cannot do simply because it's really hard to prove things like defamation, for example, or intent or actual malice. So you really have to have a lot of proofs of libel in order to let's sue somebody. It's almost impossible to sue a public person, for example, like a politician, for saying certain things. But another thing is that our news, our media is very politicized to the point that they subscribe to what we call commercial logic. There is a professional logic and there is a commercial logic. And in now day and age, commercial logic unfortunately wins because everybody wants a clickbait, right? Nobody wants good news because you can sell them. Imagine that a world without bad news would be boring. Nobody would like read any news without conflicts and drama, and so everybody wants some negativity. Negativity sells, and that's what the media goes for, to increase their subscription, their traffic level. And as a result, we lose as the audience because we sometimes stripped off and not given information that we need. So and that goes back to kind of the professional ethics and what we can do to reconcile both. Because, yeah, if you only apply professional logic, some of the news outlets might not survive because the news is business anyway. They have to make money to stay there. But you cannot really only push clickbait and sensational content, right? Because again, it threatens democracy, threatens our basic principles. So it keeps the audience in the dark, right? So ignorant.
Right, but I guess I wanted to observe when things become very important. So, it seems to me that now we see a repeat of negativity that was becoming extreme. In the 50s, we had McCarthy, and the Red Scare was rallying everybody against somebody who could be in connection with the Russians. For money, for this idea of international socialism or communism, and so on and so forth, the Red Scare. But then there were some people of moral rectitude who stood up to that guy and told him, asked him, have you no shame? And I think we can see nowadays, just yesterday, we started seeing generals expressing their opinion on what the president says. That they or even the guy in charge of the military forces. Well, we have a commander-in-chief, so he's switching now to putting diverse troops under the command of the attorney general. Which sounds like things that are happening in India nowadays with their minorities, if you have been following those things. Things that are happening in China versus Hong Kong. So hopefully they won't have time to bring us into something dark.
Yes.
Okay.
As we say, democracy dies in darkness. So
yes, yes. But if you have enough motivation to say we are under attack, we have to react. We cannot withdraw our troops anymore. Some people will, I'm waiting now for the wave of resistance from those militias that have been well established in the Deep South, who haven't said anything yet, but they are preparing.
Yeah. So yet to be seen, right?
Yes. So going to another question. what are some ways to ease tensions between two different cultures?
Well, I wish I knew. It's such a loaded question. Uh, so the problem with easing tension is that so when we look at conflicts in general, we have to understand that certain conflicts cannot be solved simply because they're embedded in moral dynamics, and so we call them moral conflicts. And with moral conflicts, people use different grammar and different words and different values that only others in their communities understand. And so as a result, sometimes we cannot agree on very basic things. Like, for example, take this concept of sustainability, right? So when business developers and environmentalists talk about sustainability, they mean different things, right? So as a result, they cannot agree with each other simply because for environmentalists, sustainability means, this sustainable environment. And for business developers means just, jobs and, employment and all those things. So same things goes on with any type of major debate like abortion, for example, right? Pro-life, pro-choice, and we talk about different grammar and different words used and different principles and different ideologies clashing. So the only way to reconcile two worldviews is by trying to understand the other point of view, but it's sometimes really hard because if you are not a part of this particular community or this group, you cannot, right? Simply because you don't relate the same way as you relate to your own community, right? So, and that's where this tough, issues happen. So where so certain moral conflicts cannot be reconciled. You can just ease the tension for a while, but then they start again. But I think I will be very kind of boring in this sense. To me, I mean, respect and assuring diversity is really important in a sense that it provides kind of different viewpoints and exposes people to different experiences they would not experience in a homogeneous society. So, and the matter of respect is really important to me. So, and that requires a certain level of culture, a certain level of civics, which unfortunately we do not have right now in our culture, in our society.
Yeah, and when you ask the question how to ease tensions between two cultures, it depends how tension the relations are. There's one thing to say, what is the relationship between Germans and French in Alsace and Lorraine? Those tensions have been appeased by economic success in the past 100 years, but before that, they were killing each other for hundreds of years, France and Germany, because they were.
Look at the case of the former Yugoslavia. I mean, tensions are still there, right? So look at things about like Kosovo, they're still arguing. And look at Turkey and Greece. Look at Cyprus.
Palestine, and
yeah.
Look at the states that are at the border with Mexico. Look what's happening in Texas,
Yes.
People who go on a rampage and they shoot people saying, I need to kill me some Mexicans. Because it's, they feel threatened directly and they're like, they need the space back. I wanted to, because, it's 4 o'clock and maybe we can go on for the next 10 minutes or so. I don't want to abuse your time, but I want to also be respectful for the people who made the effort to be present online. So I asked one of Sarah's questions earlier. Going down the list, I'll ask the first question for Ekindra and the first question for Gabrielle.
Okay.
So everybody's happy because we were online. So Ekindra asks, the 21st century world is dominated by technologies such as social media, internet, television, and print media. Within a short period of time, technology has become one of the influential tools in the history of human civilization. However, on the flip side, technology has increasingly caused so many problems and instability in our society as well. For instance, mental health issues, angriness, hatred, hate, crime, and social instability. With this factual backdrop, what can be the best solution in order to minimize such an incident in the future?
Well, it's also one of those $100 questions that I could spend the whole time talking about, the whole day. I think keep a healthy attitude. So I read this interesting article in the New York Times about how all these professionals at the Silicon Valley working on the most recent digitalized devices, they create schools for their children that wouldn't have any digital devices. So, and they wouldn't have any exposure to technology, and that would only be embedded in context that only face to face, and the use of technology will be as minimal as possible. So in the future, the kind of the possibility of being introduced to human communication and natural environment will be really a luxury. So I think that we should not forget that, first of all, face-to-face and human communication, it's the most powerful and the most persuasive one. We should not kind of lose those skills. So digital technology really kind of changing our behaviors. So we, instead of reading, we scan information. Instead of trying to discuss things with our friends, we actually simply chat with someone else, on digital devices. Like, for example, if you see in the park a company, you see everybody on their own device. Instead of actually discussing things with friends, they're talking to someone else hundreds of miles away. So I think we really have to, again, embrace those healthy attitudes about technology, because in a way, technology changing us, and we have to understand that. So I do this experiment with my students in class, and it's a class where they have to read a lot. So I asked them to raise their hands. How many of them read some important news in the morning? So they raised their hands. And I asked, so how many of you actually read past the first paragraph? So usually it's like 10% of people who read past the first paragraph. And then I asked, how many of you actually remember what the article said? So almost nobody remembers. And that's because we have this short attention span. And statistically, the attention span of the average American right now is 8 seconds. So if you can get someone's attention in 8 seconds, so they are kind of distracted by shiny things, so they'll switch their attention. And that's the consequence of us, using too much of technology. On the other hand, technology, especially hypertext and hyper surfing on the internet, teaches us a lot of skills like multitasking, because younger generation is much better than my generation with the multitasking. So you can multitask 5 devices at the same time. So people of my generation can only handle 1 or 2, the maximum, right? So, which is important for your future jobs, because your future challenges, your future employment will ask you to multitask and do a lot of things at the same time. So you're building this important skill set. So you really have to be aware of how technologies affect us and about positive and negative consequences. And that's it. And just kind of keep this balance, which is, of course, really hard.
Right. I wanted to acknowledge, the reality of nowadays that our time of the day is divided between so many things that we need to do. I realized that I have 3 or 4 email addresses, then Facebook account, then Twitter account, then Instagram account, then LinkedIn. Then because I'm in charge of a program, I'm in charge of that program's Facebook account, Twitter, and Instagram, and the website. And, then you have to do teaching, research, and service. And you have a family, and the news are tugging, at your sleeve. It's complicated, and for the younger generation, it's going to be more and more complicated.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so let's ask a question that Gabby asked. Seeing that the central goals of the European Union are to promote and maintain peace, justice, and security for international citizens, how do members of the European Union output effective language to its constituents when the countries maintain different moral codes?
It's a great question, and just like I said, that in recent literature, there are a lot of criticism towards the European Union about misrecognizing some of the new members, including Central and Eastern European countries. And as a result, they had these revolts. You probably heard about Visegrad countries and how they're trying to resist European Union bureaucracy. As a result, we have a lot of interesting new governments in Poland and Hungary that basically are very far from being democratic. And I think it's a consequence of misunderstanding the past, misunderstanding moral codes and maybe history. And this is true. The European Union been really playing favorites for a long time. And so as a result, we see things are not going the right way, especially during the COVID-19. A lot of nations feel betrayed. Look at Italy. Like, look at other countries that hope more for more help from the European Union. As a result, they were kind of getting only help within their nation states, which kind of proves the model of going back to fixing the problem using their own internal resources, right? So obviously, the COVID-19 really presented a lot of challenges to the European So I think they really need to rethink and revise the relationship they have with other countries right now, because and that kind of puts a lot of pressure on Germany and France, I think, with the UK out of the picture right now. So I think they need to come up with a new solution for how they're going to deal with other countries in the future. Otherwise, I don't really have very optimistic perspective about the future of this format. Unfortunately, because it started as a really good project.
Yeah. As a former citizen of Romania, I can tell you that that was a good thing. That was the chance to come back to the chorus of European nations. But life and the economic relations have become so complicated that are affecting the political. Okay, so final questions from the people present here. Don't forget to unmute yourselves if you want to ask a question, even if it's one of the questions that you asked on the list, or maybe because we discussed the discussion went a certain way, you were inspired to ask another question now. Sarah, I see you unmuted yourself.
I just unmuted myself. I got a lot out of this conversation, but I don't have any further questions per se.
Okay. Then, Serge, do you have a question for us?
Yes, in fact, I do have questions for you. So I know that you probably think about your future and you're already projecting, let's say 3-5 years from now. I wonder why you in communication, and where do you see yourself in the future? How do you see yourself like working in the industry, and what would you like to become? Well, maybe I'll start with Sarah.
I won't be working in the industry. I'm a teacher. I'm taking this class as a certification to teach public speaking, and I do have some background in just public speaking courses, and I just have a general I guess just interest in teaching. It's a fun class to teach that we used to have that was removed from our curriculum. So like in the future, I just see myself being able to teach seniors within this course. I like to talk about the use of propaganda and imaging. I just think it's interesting, and it's a really great subject matter to get into with students and like have really good relationships with them because of the conversations and the connections you can make with like that are the things that are going on in the world real time wise. And so I won't be, like I said, in the industry per se, but I just overall think it's interesting and I like the subject matter, I guess.
And Sarah is a master's student. Sarah,
You're in the right class. You have a brilliant professor, and I think you will be remembering this class for a long time as probably the highlight of your college life.
right.
It's going well.
Okay, the other two students, I see that they're keeping quiet. Unfortunately, my real communication students did not participate directly, but there were 5 or 6 of them, either undergraduate or graduate, and there was also an MBA student. But um, these other two students present here are in international studies, and I made this special deal for them because they needed to bypass their study abroad requirements. So this kind of immersion helps with interacting with people with other than American background.
That's great.
But I'm sure that, you know, I'm recording this and I'm gonna transform it and put it on YouTube and then put a link on Blackboard because we were talking about technology, right? And then everybody will have to watch this and have a reaction on our thread on Blackboard. So unfortunately, we don't have real people who will work in communication in the future. But maybe with this discussion, we are changing their attitude towards communication. Anyhow, Ekindra, actually, you have a background in mass communication. You were a journalist in Nepal.
Yes.
Before coming.
Yes, I was almost gonna answer Sergei, yeah, his question. So, yeah, I have a background in journalism. So I worked for 4 years in national television in Nepal. And when I moved here in the United States, I just quit the job. But somehow I was just like, I'm just really interested in communication sectors, but not in a like, you know, professionally right now, because I have not been like this label. But what makes me interested is just like I want to just continue my build up my knowledge in the communication label, and especially in journalism sectors, and then communication help to build, you know, like a better journalist also. So, and then this course is actually, you know, like it's a requirement class for, you know, obviously. And then also having this kind of background in my, you know, like history is really combining and then help me for better future in these sectors. And then also in international relationship, I know this course is also gonna help, you know, to make, you know, broader, you know, like knowledge wise.
Right.
So that's why I just came, you know, like take these classes, and then I had, you know, like research, and this is kind of like interesting class. And then Dr. Nastasia, I was asking with him, and then he says, yeah, that's a good class, you know, like just go ahead. And then, yeah, I mean, you know, I like that.
Truth. That's good.
Actually, they wrote in the Intelligencer, there's a newspaper in the area of my university, an article about this class, because I offered this kind of alternative for studying abroad for 3 students in this class. Their group immersion and then personal immersion with some independent study class. And then they can do their own research on that side. Gabby is one of the people who has been interviewed also for that article. Um, and where did you want to study, Gabby, if you went abroad?
I was going to study in Costa Rica this summer if I was gonna go, but now that didn't happen. So yeah, but this class is really my first communications class, and I really didn't know like like what really concepts we were going to cover because I've never studied anything in regards to mass communication or anything like that. So I really have just come into this open-minded, just hoping to learn more information about the way people communicate and why people communicate this way and why certain channels push propaganda in this way and why other channels try to relay information in another way. And I feel like although it's been like 4 days, I feel like I've already learned like a substantial amount of information. And I just think it's really cool too that we get to listen to all these experts and just be exposed to a lot of information that honestly I don't have a lot of like background in and stuff like that. So I'm super excited to get to learn just a lot more about communications in general, because I am a double major in criminal justice and international studies, and I plan on going to law school after I graduate and hope to work in international law with the United Nations or something like that. That's the plan. But so yeah.
Excellent. So you're in the right class, all of you. So congratulations.
What were you supposed to do in Costa Rica?
So I want to be fluent in the Spanish language. So I was going to take an advanced Spanish course there, and also a Afro-Caribbean course because I have a minor in Black Studies. And then I won this scholarship also. So I was going to study more about Muslim culture and religion there, which is what my independent project is going to be based on. So, a little disappointed I'm not able to get that experience, but I still think this, the way that this is set up where I get to take the independent project and then this course as well, it's still going to be a really cool and integral part to learning more about, just culture, like all over the world, and learn from different experts. So yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for their time, and especially Dr. Samoilenko, because he took this time to talk to us.
My pleasure. Anytime.
For me, it was an excellent discussion, and I know that Dr. Samoilenko is a fountain of information. And if you follow their group, CARP, on Facebook, actually, they are organizing periodically, right, in this period of time, discussions with specialists in communication, right?
Yes.
What kind of seminars are these?
So we do a lot of webinars right now that pretty much reflect different chapters from our recent handbook on character assassination and reputation management. And we basically try to also feature a lot of people who will contribute to future projects. So in the spring, we had 4 webinars. So one of them about psychology. One was discussing conspiracy theories, and we also had 2 kind of niche research areas, one in history, speaking about the evolution of public perception of women in politics and women in social life, and also basically Red Scare and McCarthy was the first webinar, which was done by Jennifer Cohen. So in other words, I mean, we kind of value this multidisciplinary approach that we think is really important because in a sense, we can only communicate well if we get knowledge from different disciplines like history, sociology, psychology, cultural studies, and by doing that, we understand different perspectives.
As just a side note at the end, I wanted to let you know that maybe it happens at your university too, but we were told by our dean, hey, use as chairs or directors your final funds, because we don't know what will happen next year, as discretionary funds, you know. So I convinced my chair in applied communication studies to buy me your handbook.
Oh, yay. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you very much again for your time. I will, stop this and transform the recording. And you as students, please continue the discussion online. And Dr. Samoilenko, hopefully we will have chances for collaboration in the future. And your ticket is already bought for International Studies this year. This time it's going to be in April. So we'll see.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.